I'm Audrey Miller, 29 years old, and this is the story of the most expensive grounding in Manhattan corporate history. It all culminated that night at the annual Vance Capital Charity Gala. In front of 45 of the city's elite, my stepmother pointed her finger directly at my face and yelled the words that would ultimately cost my father everything. My stepsister had just staged a public embarrassment, and my stepmother screamed, "You're grounded until you apologize to our precious daughter." The entire room instantly filled with awkward, cruel laughter, humiliating me as they watched a woman who ran half the firm being treated like a petulant child. My face burned, but the years of carrying this family's financial weight solidified my resolve. Instead of fighting, I met her gaze and stated one word. "All right." I didn't utter another syllable. I simply turned and walked away from the stunned crowd. Before the last guests had departed, I had already executed my escape, taking only the essential documents I'd spent 3 years compiling. The following morning, my stepmother, confident in her victory, strode into my bedroom. She sneered, expecting to find me broken. "Finally learned your place." However, her expression instantly froze as she realized the room was vacant. There was no me, no luggage, only a single significant paper lying on the pillow. Just then, the family lawyer burst through the door, trembling from a call he had just received. Clutching a faxed copy of the document, he stared at her, his voice choked with fear. "Ma'am, what exactly has she done with the $60 million? If you believe that self-respect is non-negotiable even when dealing with family, please hit subscribe and like this video. Comment non-negotiable below if you've ever had to walk away from a toxic situation to save yourself. I'll tell you exactly how I reclaimed everything they tried to take." The next morning, before the sun was even up, I had already left that house. I was already miles away, sitting in a quiet, sterile office with Eliza Chen, my private lawyer, finalizing the last of the paperwork. My physical exit was silent and efficient, the exact opposite of the spectacle my family demanded and craved. While I was calmly discussing wire transfers, my father, Larry Vance, was undoubtedly waking up to a profound silence that should have terrified him. He and my stepmother, Vivian Vance, must have realized by now that I was not just grounded, I was decisively gone. The humiliation they inflicted at the gala was a calculated risk on their part, a final public dismissal of me as just Audrey, the 29-year-old data analyst who occupied their oversized guest suite and supposedly handled some IT work for Vance Capital. That ludicrous cover story was the narrative my father Larry had rigidly insisted upon for 3 years. It allowed him to maintain the illusion that he was the sole brilliant architect of the firm's success, while I was merely a low-level employee whom he generously condescended to house. What they deliberately failed to see, or perhaps entirely refused to acknowledge, due to their monumental blinding narcissism, was the true staggering cost of my minimal tenancy. Every single month for 84 consecutive months, 7 full years, far longer than the 3 they publicly claimed, I transferred $8,500 into the household account. They had the audacity to call it rent, a petty, demeaning way to constantly remind me of my subordinate and unwanted status within the family hierarchy. But the cold, undeniable reality was that those payments totaling $714,000 covered almost 70% of the Vance family's sprawling living expenses. This included everything from the monthly lease on the private jet to Chloe's seemingly endless shopping sprees and Vivian's continuous extravagant renovations that never seemed to end. I was not their unwanted tenant. I was the silent, despised financier of their entire fabricated luxury lifestyle. The paper the lawyer found in my room was the first tangible evidence of the precise long-term operation I had been running beneath their noses. It was not a desperate note or a groveling apology. It was a formal, meticulously drafted legal notice from Eliza Chen, outlining the immediate transfer and isolation of my primary assets. My father, Larry, and Vivian had always perceived Vance Capital purely as his firm, a legacy entirely built by him. They were aware I managed the active portfolio, the high-risk, high-reward fund that generated the vast majority of the firm's profits. But they fundamentally and deliberately misunderstood the operational structure. They believed I was merely a glorified, high-paid portfolio manager. The actual truth was a hidden destructive bomb ready to explode in their faces. I was not simply managing the fund, I was legally designated as the Principal Guarantor Fund Manager. This designation meant I held the irrevocable authority over the largest, most crucial block of capital, a reserve totaling $3 billion that was structurally used to secure Vance Capital's major lending and investment deals, including the highly anticipated upcoming $60 million Larchmont merger. Without my direct, final, and non-negotiable approval, that entire critical capital reserve was instantly rendered inaccessible for any new business. My power was by legal definition structurally superior to Larry's authority as the mere figurehead CEO. He possessed the titles and the fleeting fame. I possessed the key to the vault itself. The final, excruciating public insult being grounded by my stepmother for not apologizing to Chloe, a 31-year-old woman 2 years my senior who contributed absolutely nothing of value, was not just personally humiliating. It was the final, irrefutable proof that my father and stepmother saw me as less than human, as nothing more than a disposable financial instrument whose feelings did not matter. This despicable act sealed their ultimate fate. I realized I couldn't just quietly leave. I was obligated to systematically extract my financial investment, my value, and my structural control. My motive immediately shifted from simple revenge to the surgical, unforgiving extraction of the entire financial foundation they had so carelessly abused for years. The moment I uttered that single word, "All right," I officially triggered the legal mechanism that would utterly liquidate their entire illusion of wealth, commencing with the swift, paralyzing removal of my name from the guarantor status. They wanted me permanently out of their sight. Fine. But the entire fraudulent house of cards was coming crashing down with me. The ringing phone sliced through my brief, necessary sleep. I had barely managed 3 hours after the paperwork with Eliza Chen was finalized, but I knew exactly who was calling and precisely what he was calling about. It wasn't genuine concern for my well-being or any delayed realization of their parental failure. It was pure, unadulterated fear, triggered by 2 distinct financial alarms: the absence of my customary $8,500 monthly wire transfer, and the sudden, unexplained, paralyzing freeze on the capital I controlled that was meant to grease the wheels for the massive Larchmont merger. I let the phone ring twice more deliberately, drawing out their anxiety, savoring the silence before I finally pressed accept. "Audrey, where the hell are you?" Larry Vance's voice was instantly hoarse, echoing the profound panic I knew he was suppressing deep down. "You missed the transfer. You need to get back here right now and fix this childish stunt before you ruin everything." I leaned back in the plush chair, taking a deep, steadying breath. "Good morning, Father," I replied, my tone deliberately detached and calm. "I'm exactly where I need to be. As for fixing things, I have already fixed them for myself." His fear instantly escalated into a frantic corporate rage, the kind he only reserved for massive quarterly losses. "Don't play games with me. The Larchmont deal is 3 days away. $60 million. Do you understand the monumental implications? Get back here and apologize to Vivian and Chloe immediately, or I swear to God I'll cut you off entirely. No more job, no more stipend, nothing at all." I almost laughed aloud at the sheer patheticness of his threat, a pathetic testament to his own complete delusion of control. "Cut me off from what Larry—" I challenged him directly, using his first name with sharp intention for the first time in over a decade, a deliberate jab at his perceived authority. You threatened to take away the job I created, the money I earned, the assets I was quietly funding. You can't cut off something you never actually controlled in the first place." I paused, letting the crushing weight of that simple, irrefutable truth hang heavy and sharp between us. No one can take away what they never gave. Hearing the confrontation, Vivian snatched the phone from him. Her voice, usually carefully controlled and modulated for public appearances, was now shrill, vibrating with pure malice. "You brat! You think this manipulative power play means anything at all? Larry will simply replace you. We'll find someone else younger, more obedient to handle your little investment portfolio, and you'll be out on the street with absolutely nothing. You are nothing without this family's name and protection." "You can certainly try to replace me, Vivian," I said coolly, letting no emotion reach my voice. "But let me make the corporate structure painstakingly clear for your benefit and for Larry's. The entire $60 million Larchmont merger is conditional on the activation of the Principal Guarantor Fund as collateral. You remember the Principal Guarantor Fund, don't you? It's the $3 billion fund whose manager holds the exclusive non-delegable authority to sign off on the collateral clause. The firm's legal paperwork is meticulously bulletproof, meticulously designed by my counsel to protect the capital from incompetent mismanagement, even if the CEO should fail. That manager must approve the guarantee. And right now, only one person holds that legally binding authority." Larry, completely sputtering and unable to form a coherent response, immediately took the phone back. "You're completely delusional, Audrey. You're just an analyst. You do glorified data entry. I sign the checks. I'm the chief executive officer. Your name is nowhere near that kind of genuine power." Check Clause 4.9 in the Larchmont Agreement, Larry. I calmly advised him, the chilling ice in my voice, contrasting brutally with his boiling, unrestrained fury. "Or better yet, ask your own panicked lawyer, who is probably already reviewing the disastrous legal notice Eliza sent. I am the sole person authorized to activate the capital preservation provision. If I don't sign off on that deal, that entire $3 billion fund is deadlocked, and your entire critical merger collapses irrevocably. It's not a negotiation tactic. It's a structural fact." Larry and Vivian completely and utterly dismissed my warning. They chose to perceive it as simple emotional retaliation, a childish tantrum thrown by a humiliated daughter seeking petty revenge. "You are just throwing a pathetic fit because you got reprimanded for humiliating your sister." Larry scoffed, his voice dripping with condescending contempt. "Go ahead and try, Audrey. You'll fail spectacularly. We'll see you crawl back here begging when you finally realize you can't survive without the Vance name. 3 days, Audrey. You have exactly 3 days before the deal legally closes, and then your supposed leverage is utterly worthless." They hung up abruptly, absolutely confident in their own profound ignorance, solidifying the monumental mistake of believing that my power was nothing more than an empty, desperate threat. They were wrong on every single count. Their 3-day countdown was my final perfect surgical window of opportunity. 3 days later, in a luxurious Manhattan boardroom, the tension was palpable. Though Larry, Vivian, and Chloe interpreted it as the electric excitement of impending inevitable success. The room was dominated by the expansive, breathtaking view of the city skyline, a deliberate, perfect backdrop for Larry Vance's presumed triumph. He sat opposite the Larchmont Group team, composed of their CEO and their lead counsel, radiating the smug, immovable confidence of a man about to seal a major $60 million victory and prove all his critics, especially his own daughter, fundamentally wrong. Vivian Vance was seated beside him, frequently leaning in to whisper advice, preening openly already, mentally spending the massive profits the deal was supposed to generate. Chloe Vance was also present, quite unnecessarily positioned prominently at the table's edge, effectively serving as a physical aesthetic representation of the strong, united, and highly favored Vance family empire. Larry had spent the previous 72 hours cycling between briefly panicking about Audrey's total disappearance and confidently dismissing her intense warnings as nothing more than childish emotional theater, and this signing was meant to publicly definitively prove his dismissal was correct. He had successfully weathered the brief 3-day window of her supposed leverage, and now he felt utterly invincible. The corporate formalities began. Documents were professionally exchanged, and pleasantries were rigidly maintained across the polished mahogany table. The lead lawyer for the Larchmont Group, a famously sharp, imposing man named Gary Mather, meticulously slowly reviewed the final draft of the lengthy acquisition agreement. The ambient silence in the room became incredibly heavy. The only sound heard was the faint rustle of high-grade paper being turned page after page. Larry, confident and increasingly smug, exchanged a subtle, triumphant glance with Vivian, a look that clearly communicated, "See, I told you she was nothing, just a spoiled girl." Then, Mr. Mather reached the signature page and abruptly stopped. His finger rested precisely on a specific clause near the bottom of the page. He didn't lift his pen. He slowly raised his head, and his expression shifted visibly from detached professionalism to one of stern, immediate concern. "Mr. Vance." Gary Mather stated, his voice cutting clearly through the manufactured confidence of the room. "I see we have your signature and the requisite corporate counsel sign-off here. However, before we proceed to the final step, we must officially address the critical requirement outlined in Clause 4-9. Larry instantly stiffened. He hadn't expected this precise bureaucratic delay. Clause 4.9, yes, that is standard boilerplate collateral protection, Mr. Mather. Everything is entirely in order. Larry lied, forcing a cheerful, dismissive, utterly false laugh. We have certainly met all financial requirements and guarantees. With all due respect, Mr. Vance, not quite. Mr. Mather insisted, pushing the physical document slightly back toward Larry. Clause 4.9 explicitly and unambiguously requires the binding signature of the Principal Guarantor Fund Manager. As your team is aware, the collateral for this $60 million acquisition hinges entirely on the proven liquidity and the immediate availability of the capital held within your active portfolio funds. My team ran the final compliance check this morning, and while the capital is correctly allocated on paper, the official authorization for release has a necessary non-waivable second layer of approval. This specific role, the PGF manager must authorize the guarantee in person. Larry's broad, self-satisfied smile instantly evaporated. He glanced desperately at his own in-house counsel, who immediately guiltily averted their eyes, indicating they had anticipated this disastrous complication. Larry tried frantically to regain control of the crumbling situation, his voice suddenly sounding tight and thick. The PGF manager, "Yes, well, we can certainly arrange that signature very shortly. Perhaps we could swiftly proceed with the primary signatures now and then circle back to 4.9 afterwards. Perhaps my extremely capable associate Chloe Vance can sign as an interim representative to expedite the process." He gestured weakly, hopefully toward Chloe, who eagerly puffed out her chest, desperate for this unexpected spotlight. Gary Mather's professional refusal was immediate and absolute. "Absolutely not, Mr. Vance. The legal language is precise and the requirements are rigid. Interim is legally insufficient and dangerous. This deal, valued at $60 million, cannot and will not be finalized without the direct, documented, and fully authorized approval of the principal guarantor. If that person is not present to execute the document, or if their current structural status is compromised in any way, the deal is dead on arrival. We have a critical international flight to catch in 2 hours, and we simply cannot afford any more delays." Who is the Principal Guarantor Fund Manager, Mr. Vance? And where is their authorized signature right now? Larry looked physically ill, a sickly green color spreading across his face. The polite ceremonial atmosphere had completely shattered into a dense, agonizing, and purely financial confrontation. He finally realized with a sickening, terrifying lurch in his gut that Audrey's private warnings were not the tantrum of a spoiled, emotional child. This was unmistakably a sophisticated, paralyzing, and perfectly legal corporate maneuver, one he had allowed to fester. The immense pressure of the Larchmont team's expectations and the impending loss of the deal settled squarely and unforgivingly onto Larry's rapidly weakening shoulders. The room, which moments ago felt like a grand celebration hall, now felt exactly like a suffocating, soundproof trap closing inexorably in on him. He mumbled something utterly incoherent about a temporary administrative delay, but the immense damage had already been done. Chloe looked completely confused and increasingly alarmed, and Vivian was leaning in close, whispering frantically, "Tell them it's you, Larry. Just sign it already." But Larry knew with a certainty that chilled him to the core that he couldn't. His power was a hollow facade, and the real power holder was now decisively controlling the situation from a distance and was nowhere to be found. "I didn't walk in, I walked straight into the eye of the storm." Larry Vance's incoherent stuttering and Vivian's panicked hushed demands instantly ceased the moment the heavy glass door of the boardroom swung open. I paused for one calculated, paralyzing second, allowing every single eye in the room to lock onto me before I stepped over the threshold. I wasn't wearing an extravagant gown. I was wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit, the exact uniform of a financial executive who wasn't there for charity or social climbing, but for business. My expression was perfectly neutral, devoid of the humiliation they expected to see, replaced entirely by cold, surgical focus. Larry Vance and Vivian Vance went completely pale, their faces losing all trace of color as they recognized me. The recognition wasn't a realization of their daughter, but a horrifying, sickening realization of the problem walking toward them. The ghost of their arrogance finally materialized. Gary Mather, the Larchmont lawyer, looked up sharply, his stern professional demeanor softening just slightly with a hint of confusion, but mostly relief. I walked directly to the empty seat next to Larry's lawyer, making it clear that I was not a spectator, but a participant. I looked across the table at Gary Mather and offered him a concise, professional nod. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mather. I apologize for the delay you've encountered." Larry finally found his voice, a high-pitched, desperate squeak. "Audrey, what is the meaning of this? You cannot be here. You are not authorized." I turned my focus entirely on my father, completely ignoring his wife and my sister for the moment. "On the contrary, Larry," I stated clearly, my voice ringing with an authority I had consciously kept hidden for years. "I am precisely the person who is authorized. You see, the only reason you are still in this room clinging desperately to a deal that relies entirely on a $3 billion guarantee is because the Principal Guarantor Fund Manager has not yet decided to fully dissolve the deal. And I believe Mr. Mather was just asking for that very person." I looked back at the Larchmont team, holding their gaze steady. "My name is Audrey Miller. I am the Principal Guarantor Fund Manager for the active portfolio." Vivian instantly shot to her feet, her chair scraping painfully across the marble floor. "That's a lie. You are a data analyst. Larry, tell them she's lying. She's trying to sabotage us because of the grounding." I maintained eye contact with Mather, seamlessly continuing my explanation, cutting Vivian out of the conversation entirely. "Beyond the legal title, Mr. Mather, my true authority stems from the fact that I am the sole owner of 85% of the active portfolios, controlling non-dilutable voting shares, a position I secured through a series of tactical buybacks starting in the first year of the fund's operation." That revelation was the ultimate devastating blow. Larry's entire face seemed to crumple inward. Chloe, who had been sitting quietly hoping to still be relevant, finally burst in, her voice shrill with indignation. "You can't. You are crazy. You don't even own that much money. Look at her. She's insane." I finally gave Chloe my full attention, my gaze utterly contemptuous. Chloe. I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it somehow filled the large room. The new Aston Martin you received for your birthday last month, the one your father proudly announced was bought with his annual bonus. That entire transaction, including the hidden excessive tax fees and the cost of the custom paint job, was secretly funneled through the active portfolio's miscellaneous expense line. I personally approve that purchase because even your ridiculous, extravagant, financially reckless spending was being passively shielded by the very person you were ordered to humiliate. I have the entire meticulously documented financial history of your personal company credit card usage, which I was silently underwriting right here in this folder. Your frivolous spending, just like Vivian's endless renovations, was simply a line item on my balance sheet. I held up the slim manila folder I carried. The air felt thick, heavy, and absolutely toxic with the sudden realization of their utter helplessness. I looked directly into Larry and Vivian's shocked, desperate eyes leaning slightly over the table. I have quietly paid for your luxury, your prestige, and your entire illusion of success for nearly a decade, while you relegated me to the corner of a life I was funding, calling me an unwanted tenant and a child to be grounded. My voice rose slightly, the finality of it terrifying even me. So tell me now, Larry Vivian, how does it truly feel to look at the daughter you contemptuously deemed nothing and realize that she has held the actual financial life of everything you cherish, including this critical $60 million deal in her hand, this entire time? Larry Vance's face was now a ghastly, bloodless white. The realization, slow and agonizingly true, had finally sunk in. The powerful, independent woman standing before him was not just a threat to his vanity, but the executor of his complete professional destruction. The silence that followed my revelation in Part 5 was heavy, suffocating, broken only by Larry's desperate, rapid breathing. His eyes, fixed on the manila folder in my hand, were no longer angry. They were wide with abject terror. He pushed himself weakly from his chair, abandoning all pretense of the powerful CEO, and stumbled towards me. "Audrey, please stop this. We are family." He pleaded, his voice cracking and low, an utterly false, desperate attempt to invoke an emotional bond that he himself had surgically severed years ago. "I know I've made mistakes. We have made mistakes. But this is about more than personal pride. This is Vance Capital, your family's legacy. Sign the paperwork, Audrey. For your father. We can fix whatever is broken between us later, I promise you. Just don't destroy everything we built, everything that carries the Vance name." I listened to his pathetic plea without moving a muscle. He was offering a reconciliation born only of financial necessity, not of genuine remorse or love. I saw the transactional nature of his appeal clearly. I looked past him at Vivian, who was now dramatically covering her face, emitting loud manufactured sobs, and Chloe, whose panic had turned her face blotchy and ugly. Chloe cried out, "Please, Audrey, I'll apologize for the party, I'll clean your room. We'll be sisters, just please don't let Dad lose this deal. I need the firm to pay for my apartment." Their desperation was both satisfying and utterly repugnant, a final display of their shallow, self-serving character. I slowly pulled the slim folder closer to my body, securing it against my chest, a physical boundary against their toxic intrusion. "You invoke family now, Larry?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Where was that concern when I was called an unwanted tenant? Where was the family bond when I was grounded like a child for the amusement of your guests? You failed to recognize my value as a daughter and as a business partner. You chose arrogance over accounting. Now you will bear the full, crushing weight of that choice." I walked over to the Larchmont contract lying on the table, not to sign it, but to retrieve my pen. I placed the pen back into my jacket pocket and then addressed the room, my declaration final and irrevocable. As the Principal Guarantor Fund Manager holding 85% of the controlling shares, I hereby officially and immediately revoke the active portfolio's collateral guarantee for the Larchmont acquisition. Furthermore, I declare a firm-wide, permanent, and irreversible block. The active portfolio will not approve, underwrite, or associate with any future transaction involving Vance Capital or Lawrence Vance, effective immediately. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The contract, the culmination of months of negotiation and due diligence, instantly became null and void. Gary Mather, the Larchmont lawyer, snapped his briefcase shut with a sharp, decisive click. He turned to Larry, his voice now cold, professional, and devoid of all previous pleasantries. "Mr. Vance, we consider this negotiation terminated due to catastrophic and material misrepresentation regarding the validity of your secured capital. Larchmont Group is formally withdrawing from the acquisition, and you should anticipate immediate legal action for damages incurred by our reliance on your false guaranteed assurance of the necessary funding." The $60 million deal, the supposed lifeline of Vance Capital, had collapsed into dust right before their eyes, replaced by the chilling, tangible threat of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Larry staggered backward, grabbing the edge of the mahogany table for support. His eyes glazed over, staring blankly at the ruined papers. Vivian's sobbing intensified, no longer feigned, and Chloe simply stood there horrified, finally realizing the true terrifying scale of the financial abyss opening beneath her designer shoes. I looked at the wreckage I had created, feeling nothing but a cool, justified finality. I straightened my suit jacket, preparing to exit the scene of my surgical strike. My last words to them were not a threat, but a simple statement of fact, a brutal, unforgiving final lesson. You wanted to teach me my place. Now you know yours. You valued a cheap insult over a $3 billion asset. Enjoy the silence. With that, I turned on my heel and left the suffocating room, leaving them trapped inside the ruins of their own colossal self-inflicted financial disaster. A few short weeks after the boardroom collapse, the news spread like a financial wildfire through the closed circles of the Manhattan elite, confirming the most brutal, embarrassing corporate failure of the quarter. The Larchmont Group immediately filed a massive, highly publicized lawsuit against Vance Capital for breach of contract, intentional fraud, and material misrepresentation regarding the security of their secured capital. This action alone, initiated by such a respected firm, was the equivalent of a corporate death sentence for Vance Capital. Other large investors, already spooked by the sudden, irreversible withdrawal of the Principal Guarantor Fund and the ensuing public scandal, rushed in a panic to withdraw their own capital, triggering a classic devastating bank run effect that no private investment firm could withstand. Larry Vance, having foolishly signed a personal guarantee on many of the firm's operational loans in his arrogant delusion of success, now had absolutely zero collateral left to offer. The combination of the Larchmont suit demanding tens of millions in damages, the investor withdrawals, and the firm's non-existent liquidity left Larry in a legally and financially untenable position. Within an astonishingly short, humiliating month, he was forced to make the ultimate public declaration, filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. This was not a restructuring. This was a complete final liquidation of assets, the ultimate corporate death for the Vance name in New York. Larry lost his entire professional reputation overnight. He was now known throughout the city not as the brilliant CEO, but simply as the reckless, idiotic father who lost a $60 million deal because he couldn't stop himself from grounding his adult daughter. Vivian Vance and Chloe Vance were in a way the most tragic and visible victims of this spectacular social and financial death. The first thing they lost was their carefully curated social standing. They were immediately viciously ostracized from every prestigious club, charity board, and exclusive circle they had fought so hard to infiltrate. The second loss was far more tangible and immediately painful. Their credit cards, which relied heavily on the firm's fluid and now frozen capital, were instantly and universally canceled. The constant, abusive, excessive spending I had quietly underwritten for years stopped cold, leaving them exposed and financially helpless. The Greenwich mansion, the luxury cars, the constant expensive flow of designer clothing and high-end consumer goods, all were systematically seized or forcefully sold off by the bankruptcy court and the creditors. For Vivian and Chloe, who had so intricately woven their entire identities around the consumption and display of immense wealth, the sudden total loss meant the catastrophic loss of their entire sense of self-worth. They were forced to move out of the Manhattan triplex, selling almost every piece of furniture, and vanish into the anonymity of the outer boroughs, where no one recognized their formerly influential name. Meanwhile, I used the chaos of the collapse to my advantage. I successfully secured the active portfolio's assets and officially restructured it, immediately renaming the entity the Miller Fund. I immediately filed the paperwork to legally change my name to Audrey Miller, completely shedding the Vance surname and cutting the final last physical thread of connection to the toxicity I had endured. The capital I had surgically extracted from the Vance empire was not simply money for personal gain. It was now a powerful tool. I established a substantial new grant program specifically focused on providing intensive legal and financial support, along with critical mentorship to young professional women who were currently being exploited or marginalized in male-dominated industries, women who starkly reminded me of the data analyst I used to pretend to be. I was now actively building my own legacy founded on merit and mutual respect. The end was a profound, chilling silence. There was no final tearful call for reconciliation from Larry, no desperate letter of apology from Vivian or Chloe, and absolutely no lingering regret from my end. I had closed that chapter with brutal surgical finality. The overriding lesson, the entire point of the ordeal was simple, yet professionally and personally profound. Self-respect is non-negotiable. I had decisively chosen the family I built my lawyer, my business network, my professional partners over the blood family who had actively, intentionally attempted to erase my value. I had paid my dues to them, and I had collected my payment in full. Larry and Vivian got precisely what they deserved. The devastating price of their overwhelming toxic arrogance was the total destruction of their entire fake, precious life. I walked away infinitely richer, undeniably stronger, and finally, truly, perfectly free.